Now, we just finished off with system hacking. And one of the pieces inside of system hacking is collecting usernames and passwords. We need to figure out a variety of ways to do that. You can't just have one methodology and think that that's going to get it done for you. So we need to think about the philosophy of Trojans and backdoors. We're gaining access now because we're actually offering up something to the end user that's attractive to them that they will be willing to click on, and that will give us either their user account or access to their system. So let's look at the system hacking process again. Remember, we've got gaining access, maintaining access, and covering our tracks. What we want to focus in on is gaining access, the low-level account access, and that next step. And that next step is, let's get an account and password by giving the user a Trojan. And so we're going to define the Trojan. We're going to look at all the different types of Trojans that are out there. So we're going to understand them. We're going to understand the backdoors, the different Trojan tools that are out there, how to make a Trojan. You should know how to do this from a functionality standpoint, from an understanding standpoint, but it's very unlikely that in your scope of work you're going to be allowed to do a real Trojan. I'll explain that later on when we get to the end, what we actually do. So, Trojan, an unauthorized program that is contained within a legitimate program. Hi, here's this cool game, play this game. When you install it, you have the privilege to install, and underneath of it, it's going to install something else. So that function, something else, is the thing that's unknown to the user. That's probably something evil and unwanted at that moment in time. Now, that's a little bit different than a covert channel. Covert channel is a communication channel. It's hidden transmission. The security policy says, we'll use this communication channel for X. And the covert channel says, we'll use it for something else. That's what a covert channel is. It was never intended as a means for communication, and it was used actually for that. Some other terms. When we compromise a machine, we usually turn it into a zombie, it does our bidding, or a bot. It is really a victim machine, and it's under the control of an attacker. So when we successfully Trojan a machine, it's under the control of someone else. Now, a backdoor is just a little bit different. It's just a way to compromise the system. It is another avenue to get in. It's a backdoor into the system. Sometimes this is a synonym for Trojans. I think they're a little bit different, but a lot of people blend these two together. So does the EC Council. So fine. So now we've got our terms down, and we're going to take a minute to look at exactly what happens after this. So we got a couple definitions down. Now we need to know what the requirements to make a Trojan act on the system. Now the first two are requirements, and the third is kind of an option in there. But first and foremost, if you can't install software, you can't get in with a Trojan. So we need the end user who's doing this action to be able to install whatever software it is. Now today we do a lot of a whitelisting as protection mechanism, so realize that you need to make sure that that executable is on the white list of that organization. They also need a trusted channel to download this over without any inspection actually occurring. Remember, if they can't communicate with you, you can't transmit the Trojan to them. Usually what we do with Trojans today is we either send them in an email or we convince an end user to click on a website and go there and download the code at that moment in time. These two conditions must be present: privilege to install and a communication channel. Now, it doesn't have to be a synchronous communication channel. It can be asynchronous. Hi, here's a USB drive. Go ahead and plug it into your machine. Auto execute, auto run kind of stuff, and then that installs a Trojan. Now, what you might want to do for a trusted channel for downloading this is use some sort of covert channel, something that is not inspected by the security mechanisms. Again, that's not a requirement, but that's kind of a bonus when you're trying to be a little sneaky here. User is presented with some sort of opportunity. What is that opportunity, and how does the Trojan work? Well, it's usually click here to install this software. The extra software is installed on the victim's machines also. And the end user, when they're going through the install routine, says, oh, I get to play this game. I can't wait. And this is going to, well, it's taking a little long for it to install, but okay, well, you know, I'll wait for it. It was a free game, right? Something else came along with it. Now, sometimes what we can do is we can go a little bit different route. Software can phone home, right? It goes out and checks in. So at first it may only do an installer file there that is just a little stub that then connects up and starts a backdoor. We'll talk about what that backdoor is and what tool to use for that as a penetration tester in a minute. But it phones home and it says, hi, I'm here. Is there anything that you want me to do? Remember, this is instantiated under that user account that when they were allowed to install software, they were also allowed to run another executable along with it. And it keeps on going out and phoning home. So now the phone home goes out to the attacker's site and comes back and says, here, take this software and install it. Here, take this command, give me a listing of everything's on the machine and send it back to me. We may not be able to install any software, but we can run commands. The attacker now controls the victim and collects any data that they want. So how do we transmit this data? Well, if there's a port that's not in use listening on this machine, then we can pump it back up through this. Now what we want to do is we want to use ports that would be reasonable in the eyes of the defender. So the intrusion detection systems, the firewalls, the administrators say, oh, well, that's a reasonable port to be open. We should allow that to go through. Today, a lot of times what happens is administrators will say, well, we're going to turn off access to ports 137 through 139. And they do turn them off, and then you open them back up and make them a listening port for that Trojan information, that channel flowing in there. So it looks like, oh, well, you know, 137's on this machine. It shouldn't be, but that's okay, because that's a reasonable port. But if you created a port on the machine 666, okay, well, that's probably an evil port, you know, because it's, you know, the sign of the devil and all. Anyway. But the idea is that that data flows back up that channel and seems reasonable for whatever reason. Modes of transmission: ICQ, IRC, attachments, browsers, email. Today, by the way, most of it is browser and email. That's where it focuses most of the time. But physical access, USB thumb drives work really, really well today. Still, it's not disabled on most machines that are out there. Software sites, free software sites. You know, anything that is free probably has some other attribute along with it. So how do you know when you've been Trojaned? How do you know when there's evil inside of your machine? And I say you don't. You really don't have any clue as to what's going on because of today's power in the machines and because the thinness and the nature of the particular Trojans that are on these machines. They don't chew up a lot of memory. They don't chew up a lot of access or network capability. They're relatively thin in the days of gigabit fiber to the desktop and super duper quad processor machines and 16 gigs of RAM. You would never notice this little tiny thing. And if you were looking inside of your processes and seeing what's going on, you wouldn't know which process was in there, and especially since it's a nice thin process that only chews up 5 or 10 megs. So now how are we going to convince this user to click on this stuff? Well, we can take legitimate software that they would use that would be reasonable for them, like a new copy of Office or Visio or something that's a utility for work, and compromise it at the root. We could go to the software site that, let's say the cool new application is Evernote, and it's actually an application that you can download. If that's the case, why don't I compromise Evernote and get them to download it here? Right? I could make a fake Evernote site that looks like Evernote and say, oh, well, this is Evernote 2. This is the next version of it, and get them to go there. Taking the real Evernote software or whatever software it is and compromising that and shoving it in there and then repackaging it and saying, here, it's free. The new trial of whatever cool tool version next is free for you. Freeware, winkware, fake programs, games, attachments, it's all a possibility. Okay, so what are you going to use what is your installed software that sits inside of this program that the end user is going to use. I think the tool of choice for us as penetration testers is Netcat. It's the best. It can ride over any port. It can do inbound, outbound, reverse connections. It can use TCP. It can use UDP. It has port scanning capabilities to see what's actually open. It also has loose source routing capability. In other words, it can redirect and route around failure. When you're using it, by the way, every once in a while in older versions of Netcat, there's this thing called reflection, so look out for it. As you type in the commands, when you've got control, when you type in the commands, they're actually echoed on the command line. So you'll see a lot of echoing in there where if you type in DIR, it'll show up on your command line as DDIIRR because once for sending and once for receiving from that client. So look out for the reflection. It's not broken. It just happens to be that you've got two machines trying to synchronize. That kind of messes with people when they're dealing with it. There is CryptCat, which is an encrypted version of Netcat. And so that's another way across that channel to protect your communications back and forth so that the defenders can't see what you're doing. So your best tool outside of the CEH that you want to learn is Netcat. Now, so far we've gotten 3 really good tools, 4 in fact. We've said Maltego is good, we've said that Nmap is good, we've said that Netcat is good, and Wireshark is good. So if you haven't done any labs and you haven't done any work at this point, those 4 tools should be on your list. Take a moment to pause and reflect and work on those tools and spend a couple hours with each one of those. Those tools are probably built into your latest distribution of Backtrack. Now you want to know what the classic Trojan ports are, and I give this list here, but the reality is that Trojans can communicate over any of the ports that are out there, but classic Trojans are tied to particular ports. The more robust Trojans today will communicate over a variety of ports, and they'll actually change. So if the user's not using the port and it seems reasonable, let's go. Let's use that port. So what ports would be reasonable on that system for that organization? I don't know. That requires you to do a little bit of scanning. So know your Trojan ports. We need to know what kind of Trojans are out there, what tools the adversaries are using, so that we can understand them. Maybe while we're doing a penetration test, we trip upon one of these things. We realize that the machine has already been compromised. It's already there. Or we may be talking to somebody who's trying to hire us and they say, you know, I'm having this problem and I see this thing. It might be evidence of a Trojan. So we want to look at all the different types of Trojans. Not all of these are specific types and there may be components of it. So give us a little latitude there. A backdoor, designed to give malicious user remote control. A backdoor is a way into the machine. A banker. In this one, this goes after a particular audience. They have an online banking system, e-payment systems, and it's stealing account data specifically related to that. A clicker, designed to access internet resources. You say, well, why would that be a big deal? There's actually a company out there called Click Forensics, and what they do is they monitor the purchase of click-throughs and banner ads and see if there's inappropriate activity. Here's what adversaries are doing today. What they're saying is we want to run up the bill on somebody who's advertising. So what we will do is we will access a whole bunch of computers out there and make those computers basically click through on that banner because they're getting paid a little bit of a fee for that click-through that's going on. How would that be? Well, we'd see them actually clicking. Well, no, it's worse than that. Today what happens is they usually submit the queries and intercept the queries for search engines like Bing and Google, and they will append these other search terms to that will lead to the banners being displayed on that particular end user site. So you may have typed in baby dolls, and along the sidebar pops up things that are teddy bears. You were really typing baby dolls, not teddy bears, but each one of those impressions that was there was charged for. And so in the clicker, what we're doing is we're doing this on a massive scale, and we're doing it underneath so it looks like normal browsing with weird search terms, and that click through or that banner ad that's popped up there for the impressions actually makes money for the adversary. An ARC bomb. This is an archive. Think tar, think zip. So what we do is we take a whole bunch of files and empty files and we unarchive those. So it's kind of a denial of service, it's slowing the machine down. So when we do that, when we decrypt or we unzip or we untar a file, that takes up processing time. So an ARC bomb is a denial of service attack against a machine, but a Trojan type. Distributed denial of service, remember this is a generic thing. Distributed group of computers for reducing the availability of a particular service. We'll talk more about DOS in its own, DDoS in its own section. A downloader, this is exactly what it says. It says it downloads this new version of malicious programs and they'll run automatically at intervals. A dropper. Now this one is very specific to creating Trojans. It is a program for installing malware. And it has actually 3 components to it. The malware, which is the evil stuff, the benign software, which is what the user wants, and the wrapper, which takes both of them and puts them together. So dropper is kind of one of the types of program for installing malware, creating this executable that is then offered to the end user. Fake antivirus. Well, hey, click here, click now, buy this thing, this will protect you because you are compromised, and you go, oh my God, okay, I've got to click on that. And users do that all the time. Hey, I've been infected and this thing will help me. Thank you very much, fake Microsoft site. I'll go ahead and I'll pay for that. And it's supposed to detect and remove that threat, which may or may not be there. And actually, in a lot of cases, what it will do is detect and install itself and protect itself and say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and give you something that you didn't want to begin with. Criminals inside of games are abound today. Malicious programs designed to steal user account information from online gaming. If you went to the police and said, somebody stole my gold, they would go, well, let's go to your house and let's dust for fingerprints. No, it's inside of a game. Did that gold or those points cost you real money? Yeah. And if somebody were to go into the game and actually take that away from you through one of their Trojan programs, well, you did lose some real value there, but there's no activity that the police can track down. So game thieves are abound. Instant messaging. Instant messaging is a vehicle for delivering some sort of information, but it also could be used to have user account data, login, and passwords for instant messaging programs where we could subvert. We could convince somebody to use that instant messaging account for something else. Ransom. Now today what we do typically with ransom is we connect to a machine, we encrypt somebody's files, and then we say to them, if you don't pay us money, we won't send you the key. And the reality is that the key never gets sent. So your files are encrypted and you can never get them back. The only thing that can help you in a ransom case is actually a good backup of your files. Text messages from infected mobile devices to premium rate numbers are a big deal today. Those premium rate numbers actually collect that money from the SMS, and they actually deposit it into somebody else's account, and through a series of paper trails and a whole bunch of different things, what we get is somebody draining your money away through dialing those premium numbers. And spy is just that. It spies on a user's actions. It listens, it captures the keystrokes, it learns those activities. A mail finder is a tool specifically related to finding email addresses. If I can get that onto your computer and you've got a nice big long list of contacts, I'll collect up that list of contacts and I'll use it for something else. I see this quite often in compromised free mail accounts where I get an email from somebody that says, "Hi, I wanted you to click on this link right here because it's really cool and I've really missed you and I haven't talked to you in a really long time." And I see that in the CC line there's 10,000 other people. They probably had their account compromised at that moment in time through a mail finder. So Trojans, remember, they're malicious software inside of good software that allows us to gain access to a target system. I think that we use Netcat in our cases, and that's our best tool. I would look at the secure list, and I would also look at Netcat to find out more information on Trojans so that you can take that next step.